I stood at the door watching them through the glass, my hands trembling in ways I couldn't quite explain. My wife Grace was laughing, a sound that was once my favorite, but now it grated against my nerves like fingernails on a chalkboard. The laugh wasn't just for me. It wasn't even for our son, Eli. It was for him, her ex. He stood there with that smug grin, the one that used to drive me insane when we were all still one happy family. And now in this moment, I realized the terrible truth. They were still a family, a different one, but a family nonetheless. And I was an outsider. I wasn't supposed to be here. Not like this. I was supposed to be the rock, the one who kept us all together. Grace had always relied on me for stability, for structure, for that illusion of control I like to give off. But now I felt like a ghost, invisible in a room full of people who didn't even care enough to acknowledge I existed anymore. It wasn't the first time I'd seen them like this, together, comfortable, but it was the first time I realized I didn't belong. There was something in the way they interacted that made my chest tighten. Their eyes would meet, that soft understanding passing between them. They shared jokes I wasn't privy to, memories I was never a part of. Eli, my son, had a look on his face that I hadn't seen in years, a look of absolute contentment, and it wasn't because of me. It was the look of a child who had found his place in a world that didn't need his father. I hated myself for feeling this way, but I couldn't stop it. I hated that I was jealous. Jealous of a man who was supposed to be nothing more than a footnote in our lives. Jealous of Grace's smile when she spoke to him, her voice soft, her eyes warm in ways that made my stomach turn. I had tried so hard to be everything they needed, but somehow it was never enough. It wasn't even that I wanted her back, not in the way I had once. What hurt the most was how easily I had faded from their narrative. I had spent years trying to be the person they needed me to be, to fit into a version of our life that was supposed to work. But Grace didn't need me to fit anymore. Neither did Eli. They had their own story now, one that didn't have space for me. And when I finally spoke, my voice sounded foreign, even to me. "You're still close, aren't you?" I didn't mean to ask it, not like that, but it came out anyway, as if some part of me had been waiting for the answer. Grace didn't even flinch. She didn't deny it. She just looked at me, her face unreadable, and then she said the one thing I could never take back. "You're overreacting." And just like that, the world around me seemed to shatter. The words hung between us cold and sharp. "You're overreacting." I tried to force the sound of her voice, to trap it in my mind, but it kept slipping away. I couldn't focus on anything except the weight of her dismissal. It was one thing to be betrayed by someone else, by an external force, but to be dismissed by the person you'd spent a decade building a life with, that was something else entirely. I wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, but I knew better. Grace had always been the type to keep things hidden behind that calm veneer, that smile that was so carefully crafted. She had perfected the art of not showing her hand. The truth of the matter was, I didn't know her anymore, and that terrified me. For years, I had been in love with the idea of who she was, not the woman standing in front of me. What hurt the most, I think, was how calculated it all seemed. It wasn't just the affair I was suspecting. It wasn't just the closeness she had with him. It was the fact that all of this had been happening right under my nose, and I had been too blind to see it. I thought I was the one holding things together, but in reality, I had become an accessory to their little world. I wasn't even a bystander. I was the one being overlooked, out of focus in the background of a life I no longer belonged to. I had always trusted Grace. I had trusted her to keep the fabric of our lives stitched tightly together. We had built something, or so I thought. But now I was faced with the reality that I had never been more than a supporting character in a play that she had been writing for years. The worst part? I wasn't even sure if I was angry or heartbroken. Both emotions swirled inside me in equal measure, a toxic cocktail I couldn't shake. I looked at her, standing there so unbothered, her eyes calm, betraying nothing. She didn't even seem surprised that I had caught on, as though this was always the way things were meant to be. "I'm not overreacting," I finally managed to say, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "This is This is something more. You've been lying to me for months, maybe longer. I can see it now. The way you look at him, the way you smile at him, it's different, Grace. She shifted, her gaze dropping for a moment, then quickly snapping back to mine. Don't make something out of nothing, she said softly, but I could see the cracks forming. She was trying to hold on to her composure, but even she knew she was losing control. And that was the worst part of all, her indifference. What Grace didn't understand was that I wasn't just hurt by her actions. I was hurt by the fact that I had trusted her enough to think I could be blind to what was happening. But I had been, so blind. Then there was Eli, my son. He was still young, still impressionable, but I saw the way he looked at me now. It was the same look I had caught on his face the other day when he told me he was glad his mom and her ex were talking again. You don't have to fight, Dad, he had said, the words stinging me in ways I wasn't prepared for. A child should never feel like he has to choose sides, but Eli was already doing just that. He had already picked them, his family. I could see it in the way he gravitated toward his mother, the way he pulled away from me when I reached out to him. I had spent years thinking I was the father who would protect him from the chaos. But now I was part of it. I was the problem. The moment Grace had made the choice to not deny the reality of their relationship, Eli had made the choice to accept it. I couldn't tell if it was worse that he understood things more than I thought, or if he was just as helpless as I was in this twisted triangle we had all found ourselves in. I had always assumed that I was the one keeping everything together. I had assumed I was the glue that held this fractured family in place, but the truth was far darker. I was the one who had been holding everything apart, too blind to see that the cracks had already begun to form long before I ever saw the truth. The betrayal didn't come in a single moment. It was a slow burn, a quiet erosion that had been happening for years. Grace had never been as transparent as I had thought. I wasn't the only one who had changed. She had grown too, but in ways I wasn't prepared for. I replayed that day in my mind over and over, trying to pin down the exact moment things had gone wrong. But I couldn't. It was like trying to pinpoint the exact moment a relationship dies, only to realize it had been dying long before you even noticed. The seeds of betrayal had been planted long ago, and now they had bloomed into something I couldn't ignore any longer. I was angry, yes. But more than that, I felt betrayed by Grace, by Eli, and by myself. I had let this happen. I had allowed it to unfold in front of me, thinking that somehow I could fix it all by being the one who always stayed the course. But now it felt like I had missed my chance. I stepped back from the door, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on my chest. I could hear their laughter again from inside, but it was muffled, like I wasn't even in the same room with them. I had to get away. I had to think. The betrayal wasn't just about Grace's actions or Eli's sudden shift. It was about me, my failure to understand who they had become without me. I thought I knew who they were, but the truth was, I had never really known them at all. And the worst part was, neither of them cared enough to stop me from leaving. Are you leaving? Grace's voice, suddenly sharp, broke through my thoughts. I didn't answer her. I just walked out the door. I didn't go far when I left. I didn't have to. I knew where to hide from the chaos, from the truth that was slowly suffocating me. I drove for hours, but my mind never stopped. It was on a loop, spiraling deeper with every passing second. I could still see Grace's face, still hear Eli's voice, still feel the cool, indifferent weight of betrayal sinking into my chest. I drove to the park, a place where we used to go as a family. Eli would always run ahead, his small legs pumping, his laugh echoing as Grace and I followed behind. Those were the days when I thought things were perfect, before I realized that perfection was just a mask, a thinly veiled illusion that kept the cracks hidden. It was in this park where I had first realized how much I needed them, how much I had invested in this family, only to find out I was the one who was dispensable. The air was cold, but the sharp sting of it didn't snap me out of my haze. The park was nearly empty, save for a couple walking hand in hand, their voices blending with the wind. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like a battleground, a place where I was losing every piece of myself I'd tried to hold on to. I parked the car in an empty lot and sat there, staring at nothing in particular. My fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, but I couldn't let go. The tension in my body mirrored the turmoil inside me. Everything I thought I knew about love, about family, about who I was a lie. I thought about what I should have said to Grace, how I could have confronted her, how I could have laid it all out and demanded she admit what was happening. But I didn't. I couldn't. The moment had passed and I had nothing left. No words, no fight, but something inside me stirred. Something darker. Something that had been lying dormant for far too long. I wasn't going to just walk away. I wasn't going to let them win without understanding how deep the knife had gone. It was clear now. Grace and I were done. Our marriage, our life, it had all been an illusion, and I had spent too long trying to preserve something that had already crumbled. The betrayal had already taken root, but now I had to decide what to do with it. I had two choices: continue being the passive victim of their actions, or take control of my own fate. I chose the latter. The next few days were a blur. I kept my distance from Grace and Eli, but the silence between us spoke louder than any words. Grace tried to call, to text, but I ignored her. I had made my decision, and I wasn't going to let her off easy. Not anymore. I began to dig. Slowly, carefully, I gathered pieces of information, little things that didn't make sense at first, but then formed a larger picture. Grace's phone had been buzzing incessantly, late at night. She always seemed to have a hidden smile when reading the messages. When I tried to look over her shoulder, she would block my view with an innocent chuckle, telling me I was being paranoid. But I wasn't paranoid, I was aware. It didn't take long for me to find what I was looking for: a text message from her ex, Adam. It wasn't the usual, "Hey, how's it going?" number. This one was different. It was laden with emotion, with an intimacy I hadn't seen between Grace and I in years. "I miss you. I want to see you again," it said. It was simple, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew exactly what it meant. It was the confirmation I needed. But it wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed to see it, feel it, experience it. I needed to know how deep their connection really went. So I took a risk. I followed her. I had never done something like this before. My mind raced with guilt as I followed her car, keeping a safe distance, making sure she didn't see me. But I couldn't stop myself. Every fiber of my being was pulling me toward the truth, toward the place where I could finally see her for what she truly was. She drove to a cafe on the outskirts of town, a place I'd never seen before. The kind of place where secrets are kept, where people go when they don't want to be found. I parked across the street, watching her through the windows. She wasn't alone. Of course, she wasn't. Adam was sitting across from her, leaning in just a little too close. They laughed, and for a moment, I felt like I was looking at a different version of my wife, one I hadn't known existed. She was glowing. She was free. But that wasn't the worst part. No, the worst part was how right it felt, how natural it was for her to be there with him, how her smile looked the same as it used to when we were young, when we didn't know better. They were comfortable together. The years they had spent apart didn't matter. They picked up right where they left off. And me? I was just the shadow in the corner of their story. The man who had once been part of their history, but now had no place in their future. That was the turning point. That was when I realized that I wasn't just hurt by Grace's betrayal. No, I was angry because I had been replaced, and I would never allow myself to stay in the shadows. I had no plan. Not really, but I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let them think they could just walk away with everything: my son, my family, my life. I had spent too long being the one who held everything together, but now it was time to take the pieces and create something new. Something for me. I started small. I kept my distance from Grace, yes, but I also began to challenge her. I made her question the life she had been building with Adam. I started asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. I forced her to confront the choices she had made. And then I turned to Eli. I hadn't realized how much he had changed until I saw the way he looked at me when I tried to talk to him. He had started to pull away. There was a wall between us now. He was caught between two worlds, his mother's and mine, and I was determined to make sure he knew where he truly belonged. But the more I pushed, the more I realized just how much I had to lose. The more I questioned everything I thought I knew about my own role in his life. Was I really the father he needed? Or was I just the man who had failed him? Each day I pushed further. Each day I chipped away at the foundations of this broken family. I could feel myself changing. The pain was still there, but it was starting to turn into something else, something sharper, something that could carve a path out of this mess. I wasn't going to let Grace and Adam think they could take my place in Eli's life. I wasn't going to let them have what was mine. I had played the role of the good husband for far too long. Now it was time to play a new role. It was a Thursday afternoon when everything came to a head. I had spent days preparing for this moment, knowing it was inevitable. The tension had been building inside me like a storm, and I was finally ready to face Grace and Adam head on. I had to do it. If I let them continue their charade, they would have everything, and I would be nothing. But if I played it right, if I strategized this moment, I could take back control of my life. I called Grace earlier that morning, my voice carefully neutral, devoid of any emotion. "We need to talk," I said. I didn't wait for her response, just hung up before she had the chance to argue. I wasn't asking for permission anymore. When I arrived at the house, I could feel the weight of the silence hanging over me. The door was slightly ajar, and I knew Grace was home. I walked inside without knocking. I could already hear her voice, soft and tender, but it wasn't directed at me. It was at him, Adam, the man who had come back into our lives so quietly, so purposefully, and stolen everything from me. I stood in the hallway, listening to their conversation. The way she said his name with that softness, the way she laughed at something only he could understand. My chest constricted. It was a feeling I'd known too well these past few weeks. I didn't belong here anymore, but I couldn't let that control me now. I needed to be calm. I needed to be strategic. I stepped into the living room, and their conversation faltered for a split second before it resumed. But the moment they saw me, the energy shifted. Adam's eyes flickered with something, guilt maybe, but Grace. She had the audacity to look at me like I was the intruder. "Eli's upstairs," Grace said, her voice clipped. "What do you want, Sam?" I stared at her, the anger rising, but I swallowed it down. Control. I had to keep control. "I want you to hear me, Grace," I said, my voice steady, but there was an underlying sharpness to it that I didn't recognize in myself. "I want you to hear the truth, because clearly, you've stopped listening." Grace frowned, but Adam shifted uncomfortably on the couch. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice low and defensive. I took a deep breath and walked over to the table where my son's school pictures were arranged, a pathetic attempt at keeping up appearances. I let my fingers linger on them, the faces of my past, and then I turned slowly to face them. "I know about you two," I said, keeping my voice as controlled as possible. "I've known for weeks. The texts, the late-night calls. It's all been so obvious, Grace. You've been lying to me. And more than that, you've been lying to yourself." For the first time, I saw something in her eyes, a flicker of panic. It was quick, but it was there. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice faltering slightly. I shook my head, a bitter smile crossing my face. "Oh, I do. I've been watching you, watching both of you, every word, every look. I see it now, the way you look at him, the way he touches you. How could I have missed it? How could I have been so blind?" Adam opened his mouth, but I silenced him with a sharp gesture. "No," I said, cutting him off. "This is between me and Grace. I'm not interested in hearing your excuses." Grace stood up, her face flushed, a mix of guilt and frustration. She took a step toward me, but I held up my hand. "I'm not here to beg for your love, Grace," I said, my voice finally breaking the calm facade. "I'm not here to make things right. I don't need you to fix me, but you will hear me. You will listen to the one person who's been pushed aside, ignored, forgotten." Her eyes widened in disbelief, and I saw the anger flash in her face. But it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't the defensiveness of a woman who had been caught. No, it was something deeper, something more complex. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I never meant for it to happen like this, Sam," she said, a hint of regret in her voice. "I didn't want you to find out this way. I didn't want to hurt you. But I wasn't listening to her apologies anymore. The moment I had been dreading was here. The betrayal, the lies, the years of walking on eggshells around her, it all came rushing to the surface in one sweeping wave. Then why didn't you stop it? I spat, my voice now rising. Why didn't you say anything when it started? Why let it fester like this, Grace? The tears began to form in her eyes, but I wasn't about to be swayed by them. I had played the victim long enough, and I was done with it. This wasn't about forgiveness. This was about taking back what was mine. I should have known better, I continued, stepping closer to her, my presence now commanding. I should have never trusted you. I thought I could fix things. I thought I could be everything you needed. But I wasn't. And I can't be that man anymore. I won't be. Grace's breath caught in her throat as I took another step forward. I could feel her backpedaling, her mind racing to find the right words, the right defense. But I had made up my mind. I'm done being your fallback, Grace. I'm done being the one who holds everything together while you live your life with him. My eyes locked on Adam, who was now standing awkwardly behind Grace, a tense look on his face. You don't get to have both. Not anymore. I'm not letting you destroy what's left of me. For a brief moment, I saw something shift in her, an understanding perhaps, but it was too late. The damage had already been done, and I wasn't the same man who had walked into this house. Then came the twist, the unexpected turn I had prepared for. I took a step back and pulled out my phone, swiping through to the text message thread I had uncovered weeks earlier. With deliberate precision, I clicked send and watched as the message went through. It was simple, cold, and to the point. Grace, we need to talk. I know about you and Adam. I won't let this continue any longer. I looked at her, the silence heavy between us. I'm done, Grace, I repeated. You've lost me. And with that, I turned and walked out of the house for the last time. The air was cold as I stepped outside, the chill biting into my skin, but for the first time in a long time, I felt something else, something sharper, something stronger. It wasn't a relief, not exactly, but it was close. I had taken back control of my life, and with that control came a strange, quiet strength. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for someone to fix things for me. I wasn't begging for Grace's affection or approval. I had finally let go of the illusion. The drive away from the house was the longest I had experienced in a while. I thought I'd be tempted to look back, to question whether I had made the right choice, but I didn't. I couldn't. It wasn't because I wasn't afraid of the unknown or because I no longer cared about the life I had walked away from. It was because I had finally faced the hardest truth of all, the truth that I was worth more than the life I had been living, and that, I realized, was the first step toward freedom. I parked the car by the lake, the familiar stillness of the water inviting me to sit in silence. This had been my place for years, a place where I'd come to clear my head, to think, to put together the fragmented pieces of my existence. It was here that I had first questioned my choices, my role in this broken family. It was here that I had found the courage to face my fears, and it was here, on this empty shore, that I could see who I had become. The man who walked away from that house was not the same person who had entered it. He wasn't the man who had been devastated by Grace's betrayal. He wasn't the man who had allowed himself to shrink under the weight of his own self-doubt and insecurity. Number one, I had shed that skin. I had stopped letting the pain of my past define who I was. For the first time, I could breathe. I could live without the weight of expectation, without being tethered to a life that had never been fully mine. And in that moment, I realized that the betrayal had done more than just break me. It had forged something stronger, something I could stand on. I didn't look back at the house, but I couldn't help thinking of Eli. I had tried for so long to be the father I thought he needed. But in the process, I had lost myself. I had poured every ounce of my energy into a marriage that was already unraveling, into a role that wasn't really mine. Now I had to figure out who I was, who I could be, without the crutch of a family that wasn't a family anymore. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to walk away from Eli. I wasn't going to allow myself to become the invisible man in his life. I would fight for him, but this time I would do it on my terms. I picked up my phone and dialed his number. He answered almost immediately. Dad. His voice, small and uncertain, hit me harder than I expected. He had always been the center of my world, even when I had failed him. And now, I wasn't going to fail him again. Hey, Eli, I said, my voice steady but filled with something softer, something new. It's me. I just wanted to talk. I could hear the hesitation in his voice, the uncertainty that had grown between us over the last few weeks. But then, after a pause, he said, Okay, Dad, what's up? I closed my eyes and let out a slow breath. I know things have been weird lately, and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry that I wasn't the father you needed me to be. There was a long silence on the other end. The distance between us was palpable, thick with the words we hadn't said. But when Eli spoke again, there was something different in his voice, something that made my heart ache in a way I couldn't describe. I don't know what's going to happen, Dad, but I'm glad you're talking to me. And there it was, the moment I had been waiting for. The bridge hadn't been burned. It was still standing, fragile, but there. I'll be here, Eli, I said, the words coming out more easily than I expected. I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to be the dad you deserve, no matter what. His voice softened. I'm glad, Dad. I really am. I hung up, my heart swelling with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't going to walk away from my son. Not now, not ever. The days that followed were a blur of self-reflection and quiet decisions. I found myself doing things I had never done before. Going to therapy, reconnecting with old friends, finding new outlets for the anger and pain that had festered inside me for so long. The work wasn't easy. The emotions I had kept buried came to the surface with a vengeance, demanding to be dealt with. I found myself questioning every choice, every moment of weakness, every failure. But this time I didn't run. I didn't hide from the discomfort. I faced it head on. And through it all, I began to rebuild. Not the life I had left behind, but a new life. One where I was no longer a passive participant. I wasn't going to be the man who let things happen to him. I was going to be the man who took control, who made decisions for himself, who no longer let anyone define his worth. Grace had been right about one thing. I wasn't the same man anymore. But she had been wrong about thinking I couldn't survive without her. In fact, I was stronger without her, stronger without the chains of expectation, without the facade of a perfect family. I wasn't a victim of betrayal anymore. I was a man who had been broken, yes, but who had risen from the ashes. And in that rise, I found something unexpected. Peace. A quiet, hard-earned peace that came from knowing that I had done everything I could to save my family. And when it was clear that they couldn't be saved, I had the strength to walk away. And now I was finally living for myself, for the first time in a long time. For support, do like, comment, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.